Forward! The sad, sad truth about Captain Underpants.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the second half of Captain Underpants and the big bad battle of the Bionic Booger Boy.
This comic book should give you a pretty good update of our story so far. Dang, at this point the stories will get more confusing when it introduces time travel. Go! Once upon a time, there are two cool kids named George and Harold.
You're mega groovy.
Me too! But unfortunately, they had a mean principal named Mr. KRUPPY.
Blah blah blah.
So one day, they hypnotized him with a 3D hypno ring.
You will obey our every command.
Yes, masters.
Mr. KRUPPY came under their control.
You are now a monkey.
But they made a terrible mistake. You're now Captain Underpants!
Okay. Tra-la-la.
It was funny until he jumped out the window.
Hey, come back here.
No way.
Mr. KRUPPY really thought he was a real superhero. He got in all kinds of trouble. Oh no! One time he almost got killed by a dandelion.
Help.
So George stole some superpower juice from a UFO. And he gave it to him. And Mr. KRUPPY got superpowers. Now he can fly and stuff.
Here we go again.
Now, whenever Mr. KRUPPY hears somebody snap their
Blah, blah,
fingers,
blah.
he turns into Captain
Tra-la-la.
Underpants.
I will never see you. It's water on his head.
He turns back into Mr.
Blah blah
KRUPPY.
blah.
So remember,
don't snap your fingers around
Mr. KRUPPY. But that's only the first part of our story. Read on. Okay. Well, there's this other kid in our school named Melvin Sneedly.
I'm a dumb nerd.
Melvin invented a combino thingy that morphs stuff together. First, he combined his pet hamster, Sulu, with a robot.
Eureka! I have created the world's first Bionic Hamster.
Next, he tried to combine himself with a robot, but he sneezed
I'm
at the
Joe.
last second. And he accidentally got combined with a robot and his boogers. He became the Bionic Booger Boy.
I'm a dumb nerd.
Uh-oh.
Then one time,
I'm Joe.
he caught a cold. Then he got mad and turned into a monster. Then he ate up Captain Underpants. But Sulu the Bionic Hamster beat him up. Then Melvin's parents came and reversed the combino thingy. They blasted him and blew away the boogers. Now Melvin and Mr. KRUPPY were safe, but something was wrong with them.
I'm a dumb nerd.
Blah blah blah.
Then the boogers came to life and smashed the combino thingy, and the chase was on. The end of part 1. Chapter 1. George and Harold. This is George Beer and Harold Hutchins. George is the kid on the left with the tie and the flat top. Harold's the one on the right with the t-shirt and the bad haircut. Remember that now? Remember that now? This is Mr. KRUPPY, Melvin Sneedly, and Sulu the Bionic Hamster. Mr. KRUPPY is the one on the left with the underwear and the bald head. Melvin is the one on the right with the bow tie and the glasses. And Sulu the Bionic Hamster is the hamstery looking one in the middle with the laser eyes, the microhydritic jumpatronic legs, the super aquanolytic mitral-altronal arms, the virtually indestructible flexoglow-atomic endoskeleton, and the twin Turbo 3000 SP5 Kung Fu Titanium Lithium Alloy processor. Remember that now too. And these are the Ridiculous Robo-Boogers, 3 of the vilest, most disgusting, and most terrifying creatures ever to dip across the face of the earth. Even their names were horrible, monstrous monikers, the sound of which will drive madness into the hearts of the bravest of heroes. If you dare to know their nightmarishly deplorable names, I will tell you. But don't blame me if you had to sleep with the nylon on for the rest of your life. Their names were Carl, Trixie, and Frankenbooger. See? I told you they were scary names. Carl, Trixie, and Frankenbooger each bellowed out, terrifying, ear-piercing screams of unstoppable fury as they chased our heroes down the city streets. Finally, the Robo-Boogers cornered everyone in the dead-end alley. The 3 famished feeds oozed closer and closer until at last they leaped towards their prey. The situation had become so frightening that George, Harold, Melvin, and Mr. KRUPPY closed their eyes tightly and wailed for the terrifying sounds of their own inevitable demise. Globble, globble, globble. But instead of hearing inevitable demisely tight sounds, our heroes heard something quite different. You see, At the very last second, Sulu the Bionic Hamster stretched open his flexoglomatic jaw and shoved the 3 boogly behemoths into his mouth. Sulu's bionic cheeks swelled to capacity as he raised the furry head towards the sky. Then, with the force of lunar shuttle liftoff, Sulu shot the 3 slimy villains into space. Spatooey, spatooey, spatooey. The 3 ridiculous Robo-Boogers sailed through the sky like cannonballs. In no time at all, they left Earth's atmosphere and began sailing towards Uranus. The terrifying battle was over. Wow, that was a really quick story, said Harold. This is going to be our shortest adventure ever.
Ain't that the truth?
Said George. Chapter 2. It ain't. Unfortunately for George and Harold, their adventure has only just begun. As everybody walked back to school, a confusing argument got underway.
I want my hamster back!
Said Mr. Krupp.
Your hamster?
Said George.
First of all, he's our hamster now. And second of all, he never belonged to you. He belonged to Melvin.
I don't care who he belongs to.
Melvin interrupted.
Hamsters aren't allowed in school. Especially not in my school. I'm giving all 3 of you bubs a detention for bringing a furry beast into your classroom.
You can't give us a detention, said Harold. You're just a kid like us. Suddenly, Mr. and Mrs. Sneedly came running towards them.
Melvin, you're alright!
Cried Mrs. Sneedly.
We're so happy you're safe, son.
Cried Mr. Sneedly.
Mommy! Papa!
Cried Mr. Krupp. He dashed over to Melvin's parents with open arms. The sight of a bald, grown man in his underwear running towards them made Mrs. Sneedly scream in horror.
Hey, what's the big idea?
Yelled Mr. Sneedly.
It's me, Papa!
Cried Mr. Krupp.
Don't you recognize your own son?
Get away from us, you weirdo!
Mrs. Sneedly yelled as she hit Mr. Krupp with her purse. Melvin ignored the commotion as he walked past them all and went into the school. Melvin stormed upstairs and headed for the school office. Everyone except Miss Anthro has already gone home for the day, and she was getting ready to leave too.
Just where do you think you're going, woman?
Shouted Melvin. Miss Anthro turned and stared in shock at the 4th grader standing behind her. What did you just say? She screamed in a voice that is rapidly becoming a scream. Who do you think you are?
I'm the guy who's gonna fire you, Heiny, if you don't give me my coffee. Now! Yelled
Melvin. Normally, school secretaries don't have the authority to hang a child from a coat hood by his underwear. But today has been a particularly stressful day for Miss Anthro. She has been covered in snot, carried through town by a ramping robotic monster, and worst of all, forced to chair roll in an elementary school field trip. Now, it was payback time. Chapter 3. Mr. Melvin and KRUPPY the Kid. Miss Anthro collected her things and left for home, grumbling under her breath as she passed George and Harold in the hallway. The 2 boys could hear Melvin's angry shouts coming down the hall, so they went to the office to investigate. While they were getting Melvin off the hook, Mr. Krupp ran into the office, sweaty and out of breath.
You guys have got to help me!
He cried.
My mom and dad are trying to kill me! Has the world gone mad?
Relax, Einstein,
said George calmly.
and put on some clothes.
George and Harold had already figured out what's going on, so they tried to explain the situation to Melvin and Mr. Krupp. You see, said Harold, after you guys got merged together by the Combinotron 2000, we switched the batteries around and separated you. But for some strange reason, it switched your brains around. Now Mr. Krupp's brain is inside Melvin's body, and Melvin's brain is inside Mr. Krupp's body.
That's a bunch of bunk.
Yelled Melvin.
Take a look and see for yourselves,
said George. He pulled up full-length mirror in front of Mr. Krupp and Melvin. They looked at themselves in astonishment.
I'm a kid again,
said the guy who looked like Melvin but had Mr. Krupp's brain.
And I'm old and fat and bald and ugly!
Cried the guy who looked like Mr. Krupp but had Melvin's brain.
And I have bad breath and creepy nose hairs and—
Hey!
Yelled the guy who looked like Melvin but had Mr. Krupp's brain. At this point, you might be saying to yourself,
Dang, this book is getting confusing.
Now don't worry, this will all be cleared up by the end of chapter 17. But for now, let's rename the 2 characters who have the right brains in the wrong bodies, shall we? Let's call the guy who looked like Mr. Krupp but had Melvin Sneedly's brain, Mr. Melvin. And we'll call the kid who looked like Melvin Sneedly but had Mr. Krupp's brain, KRUPPY the Kid. Please refer to the handy X-ray chart below in case you get mixed up. Chapter 4. Things Get Worse. KRUPPY the Kid climbed up into his chair and demanded to know what was going to be done about this mix-up.
I could solve this problem right away if I still had my Combinatron 2000.
Said Mr. Melvin, sheepishly.
But it got smashed in the last book.
Well, start building a new one, Bob.
Shouted KRUPPY the Kid.
Okay.
Whined Mr. Melvin.
But it will take about 6 months.
6 months!
Screamed KRUPPY the Kid.
I can't go around working with a kid for 6 months. I've got school to run, Buster.
Sorry,
Mr. Melvin whimpled.
but building a color combiner is extremely difficult. It takes time. It's not easy like building a robot, or a time machine, or a photoatomic transmobility Yoto Sloan crystallizer.
Hey, wait a second.
Said George.
Did you say that building a time machine was easy?
Yeah,
Said Mr. Melvin.
it just takes a day or two. Why?
Well, why don't you just build a time machine?
Asked George.
Then you could go back in time to before the Combinatron 2000 got smashed, grab it, and bring it back to the present time.
Mr. Melvin thought for a moment, and then his eyes lit up.
I've got it.
He said, snapping his fingers.
I'll build a time machine, then go back in time to before the Combinatron 2000 got smashed. Grab it, and bring it back to the... Hey, what the heck is he doing?
Everyone turned and looked at KRUPPY the Kid, who had just stripped down his underwear and was now tying a red curtain around his neck.
Oh no!
Screamed George.
Get some water! Get some water!
Hal ran out to the drinking fountain, but he was too late. KRUPPY the Kid shouted triumphant,
Tra-la-la.
then turned and flew out the window. Chapter 5. Things Get Worser.
Did you guys just see that?
Cried Mr. Melvin.
I mean, KRUPPY the Kid just flew out the window. He flew.
Yeah, we know.
Said George with a sigh.
That's amazing.
Cried Mr. Melvin.
He must think he's Captain Underpants or something. Or could it be? Could our principal really be Captain Underpants?
Well, duh, said Harold.
But Mr. Crumb doesn't look anything like Captain Underpants.
Said Mr. Melvin, frantically.
Captain Underpants is bald, and Mr. Crumb usually has hair. Hey, I know. Maybe Mr. Crumb wears a toupee?
I thought you were supposed to be in the gifted program.
Said George.
But how can he fly? And where did he get his superpowers?
Asked Mr. Melvin. It's a long story, said Harold. Mr. Melvin calmed down a bit, walked confidently across the room, and sat in the principal's chair. He leaned back and smiled a devilish grin.
Well, why didn't you go ahead and tell me all about it?
Said Mr. Melvin.
I've got all the time in the world.
Chapter 6. Things Get Worserest. George and Hal had no choice but to come clean. They told Mr. Melvin the whole story of Captain Underpants, how they had hypnotized Mr. Krupp, how he drank the alien superpower juice, and how his superpowers must have somehow gotten transferred into Melvin's body, along with Mr. Krupp's brain. While George and Hal were talking, the smile on Mr. Melvin's face grew wider and wider, and eviler,
What are you smiling about?
said George.
This is serious!
Yeah, said Harold. We're in big trouble if we don't switch things back to normal,
Correction.
said Mr. Melvin.
You guys are in big trouble. All my troubles are over. I, Melvin Sneedly, am gonna get back into my old body but keep those superpowers for myself. I'm gonna become the world's first superpowered kid.
Hey, you can't do that, said Harold.
I can do whatever I want.
Snapped Mr. Melvin.
I'm in charge now. I look just like the principal, so I'm gonna make the rules. And you guys are gonna follow them. Or else!
Or else what?
George demanded.
Or else!
Snarled Mr. Melvin.
I'll order your teachers to give you guys 12 hours of homework every night for the next 8 years.
That shut George and Harold up. Mr. Melvin's first order of the day was for George and Harold to create a new comic book about the world's first superpower kid, Melvin Sneedly.
Give me a really cool name.
Said Mr. Melvin.
Like Big Melvin or Mystery Melvin.
Mystery
Melvin?
Melvin, said George and Harold in disbelief.
I make up a story where I defeat Captain Underpants and become the world's greatest superhero. And you better not make me look stupid either.
Mr. Melvin shouted. But we can't make a comic book right now, cried Harold. We can't chase after Captain KRUPPY the, Underpants kid,
You can chase after him all you want.
said Mr. Melvin.
After you make that comic book, now get going. I've got a time machine to build.
Chapter 7. The Purple Potty. Mr. Melvin went out and brought all the things he needed to build his time machine. Now he needed a place to build it. He wanted someplace quiet and private, someplace empty and secluded. A room that nobody ever used.
I've got it!
He cried.
Our school library!
The library at Joan Horrocks Elementary School has once been a wonderful place of knowledge and learning. But a few years back, the librarian, Miss SINGERBRAINS, has begun banning most of the books. Now the library has filled with only the rows of empty bookshelves and posters that warn the potential supervised dangers of reading. It was the perfect place to hatch an evil plan. Mr. Melvin pushed his cart into the dusty, cobwebby room and flickered on the lights.
Welcome, sir.
Said Miss SINGERBRAINS.
Have you come to check out the book?
No.
Said Mr. Melvin.
I need to find a large box, like a phone booth or something.
There's a purple, portable potty down in the basement.
Said Miss SINGERBRAINS.
That'll do.
Mr. Melvin said.
Go get it for me.
I can't carry that thing up 3 flights of stairs all by myself.
Cried Miss SINGERBRAINS.
Alright.
Said Mr. Melvin.
I'll help you.
Mr. Melvin supervised while Miss SINGERBRAINS carried the happy potty to the top of the treacherous steps.
Good job.
Said Mr. Melvin.
Now go clean out your desk. You're fired.
Fired?
Cried Miss SINGERBRAINS.
What for?
For the rest of your life.
Said Mr. Melvin. Chapter 8. Meanwhile, back in outer space, a team of scientists working at the Pequot Order of Professional Space of Interplanetary Explorers were on their way to investigate the planet Uranus when they came across something that was very strange. Mayor Buzz TOMSKI and his crew had just discovered a bizarre cluster of what appears to be robots and toilets resting on the planet's surface. The astronauts were so busy looking at their monitor that they didn't notice the 3 slimy, squishy, boogery thingies speed towards their spaceship. Splat! Sploot! Smack! Chapter 9. Ground Control to Major TOMSKI. Suddenly, a very concerned voice came across the Poopsie space phone.
What's going up there, Bob?
Asked Ground Control.
We're okay,
Said Major TOMSKI as he unzipped the cockpit's window screen for a better look.
but it appears our ship has just been spotted by 3 unidentified squishy objects.
That does it.
Said Ground Control.
This mission is just getting too strange. I want you guys to turn that ship around and come on back home.
Will do.
Said Major TOMSKI. He pushed the clutch, shifted the ship into reverse, and in no time at all, the Poopsie shuttle was headed back to Earth, with 3 jiggling stowaways hanging on for a long ride home. Chapter 10. Mean Mr. Melvin. The next day, Mr. Melvin was putting the finishing touches on his time machine when he heard cries of laughter out in the hallway. He opened the library door and saw a group of 3rd graders happily reading George and Harold's new comic book. Mr. Melvin stomped down the hall, grabbed the comic out of their hands, and gasped in horror.
What the?
He screamed as he glares at the comic book's cover. Chapter 11! Captain Underpants in the War of the Really Wonder Nerd! Once upon a time, there was a nuclear power plant. It had a lot of waste. The waste was supposed to be taken to a dump, but one barrel fell off. The barrel rolled down a hill and landed on a cotton field. Soon the gun soaked up to a nuclear waste and began to grow. Then one time the gun got harvested.
This cotton ball sure is heavy. Yeah, it's big too.
And they took it to an underwear factory. The gun got made into underwear.
Hey, it's glowing.
Soon,
Look, Melvin, there's a sale on glow-in-the-dark underwear.
Duh, me want some mommy, duh.
soon Melvin had his very own pair.
Now you're the coolest kid ever.
Duh, as I am.
But that night, the radioactive underwear made him grow, and grow, and grow! The next morning, Melvin woke up. So he walked to school.
Duh, I'm grumpy.
Sir, a giant nerd is attacking the city. Oh, the army, and stuff.
Soon the army and stuff arrived. Then there was a big war.
I'm trying.
Wonder Nerd picked up a tank and threw it. Meanwhile, at the nearby school,
You guys are pathetic. You're worthless and weak.
Help! Wonder Nerd just threw a tank and squished somebody. Oh no! Who was it?
It's a gym teacher.
Thank goodness. I thought it was somebody important. This looks like a job for
Captain Underpants!
Hey, Wonder Nerd, quit it!
I'm not a nerd. I'm cool. My mommy says so.
Captain Underpants threw around and saw attack on Wonder Nerd's undies.
Aha! I got you.
Okay, do whatever you want. but please don't dunk me in the lake.
Huh?
You can kill me, but please don't dunk me in the lake. I pray it.
Oh yeah? Well, maybe I will dump you in the lake.
Oh, heavens no.
I'll show you.
No way.
Ha ha ha. Get ready.
Oh, man.
Hey! What the? Oh, my underpants got wet. It's leaking.
Here, birdie.
Hurry up and get the underpants!
It's off to Nerd Jam with you.
Whoa!
Tra-la-la.
The end! Moral. Always buy pre-shunked underwears. Treehouse Comics Inc. Chapter 12. Mad Mr. Melvin. Mr. Melvin was furious. He marched into the office and turned on the school intercom.
George Beard and Harold Hutchins.
He shouted over the loudspeakers.
Meet Mr. Mr. Crumb in his school library right now.
We have a library?
Said George. After about 20 minutes of searching, George and Hal finally came across a room they had never seen before. They entered cautiously, stepping quietly past rows and rows of empty bookshelves until they met up with Mr. Melvin.
I told you guys to give me a cool name and not to make me look stupid.
Mr. Melvin screamed, clutching their comic book in his sweaty hand.
Oops.
Said George.
I thought you said to give you a stupid name and not to make you look cool.
Yeah, said Harold. It was an honest misunderstanding. Mr. Melvin threw the comic book to the ground and led George and Harold over the purple potty.
Remember when I had that good idea to build a time machine?
Asked Mr. Melvin.
Actually,
Said George.
that was
Well,
right.
here it is.
Mr. Melvin interrupted triumphantly.
And you two smarty pantsies are going to test it out for me.
Huh? Said Harold.
I'm sending you kids back in time to the day before yesterday.
Mr. Melvin said.
And you better not return until you've got my Monotron 2000.
Cool.
Said George.
I've always wanted to travel through time.
Mr. Melvin had a great deal of instructions for George and Harold before they left on their journey. And though the instructions were quite boring, it would have benefited the boys if they paid quiet attention instead of switching the letters around a nearby bulletin board. Mr. Melvin spoke at length about the workings of the time machine and the proper etiquette of time travel.
You must be very careful that nobody sees you on your journey.
Mr. Melvin said.
If they do, just zap them with my new invitation. The Forget Columbically 2000. This will erase everything in their short-term memory, and they won't remember ever seeing you.
Mr. Melvin had also built a fake Combinotron 2000 to switch with the real one. Finally, Mr. Melvin gave George and Harold a very important warning.
Whatever you do, it is very important that you don't use this time machine 2 days in a row. It needs to cool off every other day, or else it might open up an interdimensional reality realm that could destroy the entire planet.
George and Harold started laughing at their new message on the bulletin board.
Hey!
Mr. Melvin shouted.
Have you kids even heard one word I said?
Yeah.
Said George.
We gotta switch the thing with the thingy.
And if somebody sees us, said Harold, we'll zap them with the witchamathingy.
Oh, we got it.
Said George. George and Harold stepped into the purple potty as Mr. Melvin closed the door behind him. Harold set up the controller for the day before yesterday. Then George pulled out the chain. Suddenly, there was a brilliant flash of green light, and the purple potty disappeared. Chapter 13. The day before yesterday. After a few moments of flashing lights, everything became quiet. Harold opened the potty door and peeked out into the darkened library. Cautiously, the two time travelers stepped into the library window and looked out. There they saw Melvin's father, Mr. Sneedly, zapping the Bionic Booger Boy with a blast from the Combinotron 2000.
In there.
Said George. Done that, said Harold. In the corner, George and Harold found a coat and a hat which belonged to Miss SINGERBRAINS. Immediately they thought of a plan. Harold put on the coat and hat and climbed onto George's shoulder. "I sure this guy works," said Harold.
Better.
Said George.
Can't whispering them recognize us.
Soon George and Harold were at the scene of the action. Mr. Sneedly had just fired the Combinotron 2000 a second time, and now the boys were ready to make the move. Excuse me, Mr. Sneedly," said Harold, trying very hard to sound like a grown-up. "I'd like to present to you the most brilliant science girl of the whole wide world award,"
Really?
cried Mr. Sneedly.
It's always been my dream to win that award.
"But first," said Harold, "I'd like you to have a look at that Combino thingy,"
Okay.
said Mr. Sneedly. He handed Harold the Combinatron 2000 and smiled proudly. Said Harold. I need to look at it behind those bushes over there. Harold and George wobbled over to the bushes, unbuttoned their coat, and switched the two Combinatrons. Then they wobbled back and handed the fake Combinatron 2000 to Mr. Sneedly. Everything seems to be in order, said Harold. But before we present this award, we'd like to get a photo of you.
Who's we?
Asked Mr. Sneedly. I'd like to get a photo of you, said Harold, nervously. George struck his hand out of the coat and held up the Forgetchamacaulay 2000. Say cheese, said Harold. Mr. Sneedly looked down in shock at George's hand. Then George pressed the button. Flash! Suddenly, Mr. Sneedly forgot everything that just happened, danced in confusion, and stumbled back and rejoined his wife just in time for the Robo-Boogers to come to life, and smashed the fake Combinatron 2000. Meanwhile, George and Harold were running with all their might back to the library carrying the real Combinatron 2000.
That was so easy,
laughed George. Yeah, said Harold. We sure got lucky this time. But when they reached the library door, George and Harold discovered that they haven't been quite so lucky after all. Chapter 14. Miss Innerbrains.
What the heck is going on here?
Shouted Miss Innerbrains.
I just got back from the restroom and found a portable potty in my library.
Harold!
Said George.
Zap her with the Forgetchamacaulay! Quick!
Nobody's zapping anybody with anything.
Shouted Miss Innerbrains. She grabbed the Forgetchamacaulay 2000 out of Harold's hands and yanked the Combinatron 2000 out of George's hands.
I'm taking these things to the police right now,
she said.
Maybe they can sort out this mess.
Miss Innerbrains marched downstairs into the parking lot, got in her car, and began driving to the police station. Well, said Harold, we'll never catch up to her now,
Sure we will,
said George.
All we need are some wings.
Chapter 15. 65 million years before the day before yesterday. George and Harold grabbed a box of saltine crackers off of Miss Innerbrains' desk. Then the two friends stepped inside the purple potty and closed the door. Quickly, George reset the controls and pulled down the chain. A flash of green lights lit up the room, and the purple body vanished. Suddenly, George and Harold were transported back in time to the late Cretaceous period of the Mesozoic era, a time when dinosaurs ruled the world. Cautiously, George and Harold peeked out of the purple potty, which was now nested precariously in the branches of a tall tree.
Here, chicky,
called George. Polly, want a cracker? Called Harold as he tossed a handful of saltine into the air. Suddenly, the two boys were swarmed by hungry pterodactyls. Before long, a friendly-looking pterodactyl, a Quetzalcoatlus to be exact, swooped down and grabbed some crackers from Harold's hand. Ah, look, said Harold. He likes me,
Great,
said George.
let's get him into the time machine and get out of here.
Carefully, Harold took the pterodactyl in his hands and carried him into the purple potty. Then, the boys closed the door behind him, reset the controls, and pulled down the chain. Suddenly, George and Harold and their new reptilian pal were transported forward in time to the day before yesterday. The door of the time machine swung open, and the three friends sailed out of the purple potty throughout the library window and up over the town. George looked down at the city streets until they located Miss Innerbrains' car.
There she is!
George cried. I sure love our new pterodactyl, said Harold. I'm going to name him Crackers.
Don't give him a name,
said George.
We're not keeping him, we're just borrowing him.
George, Harold, and Crackers swooped down and landed on Miss Innerbrains' car, which was parked at a traffic light. Miss Innerbrains screamed in horror.
Wait!
Cried George.
There's no reason to be afraid. You're just dreaming.
I'm dreaming,
asked Miss Innerbrains. Sure, think about it, said Harold. Purple bodies appearing out of nowhere, kids running around with laser zappers, Pterosaurus landing on your car. This stuff only happens in dreams.
Gosh, you're right,
said Miss Innerbrains.
But it all seems so real.
Well, trust us,
said George.
In a few minutes, you won't remember any of it.
Before long, George, Harold, and Miss Innerbrains were gliding back to school on their new good pal, Crackers. the Combinatron 2000 and the Forgetjamacaller 2000 were safe once again. Soon they arrived back at the library.
I'll keep an eye on the SINGERBRAINS,
said George.
You take that pterodactyl back where we found him.
Aw, can we keep him? asked Harold.
No,
said George sternly.
he belongs in his own time. Now take him back.
Aw, man, said Harold. Sadly, Harold carried crackers into the purple potty and closed the door. After a few seconds, the time machine disappeared in a flash of green light. A half hour later, another flash of green light filled the room, and the purple potty was back.
What took you so long?
asked George. Nothing, said Harold.
Did you have any trouble taking crackers back to his home?
asked George. Not really, said Harold.
You did take it back to his home, didn't you?
asked George. Sure, said Harold, though he didn't sound very sure. Quickly, George zapped Miss SINGERBRAINS with a Forgetjamacaller 2000 and jumped into the purple body. Then, with a quick flash of green light, they were gone. Chapter 16. Back to the present. Mr. Melvin was very happy to see his purple potty return to him, and even happier to see his beloved Combinatron 2000.
Now all I need,
he said with a sneer,
is to find Captain Underpants.
Fortunately, Captain Underpants, who you'll probably remember looked just like Melvin Sneedly, wasn't too far away. Unfortunately, he had spent the last 2 days getting himself into trouble. First, he started off by annoying some old ladies. Captain Underpants had been helping them cross the street when he heard a little girl crying for her kitten, which was stuck in a tree. Captain Underpants rescued the kitty, but forgot about the old ladies. Hey! shouted one of the old ladies. That flying kid just left us up here in this tree. I'm gonna get that kid if it's the last thing I do, said the other old lady. Next, Captain Underpants was soaring above the football field when he encountered an unidentified flying object. It was made of brown leather and had white stitching on the side, said Captain Underpants.
This could be a dangerous UFO.
He grabbed it and flew down to the football field where, oddly, the school football team was having a big game.
I don't want anybody to panic,
Captain Underpants shouted.
but I just captured this UFO. I'm going to take it to the moon where it can be safely destroyed.
Suddenly, the players from the visiting team tackled Captain Underpants, which cost the home team 50 yards and the game.
That kid just made us lose our biggest game of the year,
shouted Mr. Meaner.
I'm gonna get that kid if it's the last thing I do,
snarled the quarterback. Finally, Captain Underpants got on the bad side of some skateboarders in the park. He had politically pointed out the no skateboarding signs, but the skateboarders refused to go away. So Captain Underpants had no choice but to snap their skateboards in half with his kung fu kicking action. Then it was spankings for everyone.
Dude,
cried one of the skateboarders.
That little dude just like duded our dude boards. Dude,
said another skateboarder.
I'm gonna dude that dude if it's the last dude I dude. Dude.
Chapter 17. The Big Switcheroonie. Mr. Melvin ordered George and Hal to stick their heads out of the window and call for Captain Underpants. Soon, the waistband warrior appeared. Mr. Melvin welcomed the cave hero inside and asked him to pose for a photo.
Well, I'll be delighted,
said Captain Underpants.
Great,
said Mr. Melvin.
Put these clothes on and stand over there.
At first, Captain Underpants was reluctant to put on clothes, but he finally agreed. Mr. Melvin, who had worked all afternoon, reconfigured the Combinatron 2000, pressed the start button, and ran and stood beside Captain Underpants. Suddenly, the two glowing lasers began including the DNA of the two subjects. It was about to combine. Then, a burst of gray light shot out the Combinatron 2000 and formed a ball of energy between Captain Underpants and Mr. Melvin. They both lit together into a gray light and formed a giant glob of fleshly goo. The newly reconfigured Combinatron 2000 then switched polarities and began the process of separating the two human elements. The gray ball of light slowly changed into a lovely shade of pink. Suddenly there was a blinding flash of light, a quick puff of smoke, and it was all over. Everybody's brains were back where they belonged.
Wow, That sure is a weird camera,
said Captain Underpants, who now looked exactly like Captain Underpants.
Can I take off my clothes now? They're bad for my image.
Go right ahead,
said Melvin Sneedly, who now looked exactly like Melvin Sneedly. Finally, it looked as if everything was back to normal. But as we all know, looks can be deceiving. Chapter 18. The Return of the Ridiculous Robo-Boogers. Just then, the Poopsie space shuttle landed at Piqua International Airport. It wasn't the smoothest of landings, due to the fact that 3 robotic boogers had just eaten most of the shuttle's tail fin and nearly all its rocket thrusters. Major TOMSKI and his crew had barely escaped with their lives. Inside the school library, Captain Underpants heard the astronauts' panic cries coming from the airport.
This looks like a job for me,
he shouted, and with a mighty
tra-la-la,
he leaped out the window and fell 3 stories to the ground. George and Harold screamed and ran downstairs.
Captain Underpants!
Cried George.
You okay?
Speak to us! Cried Harold. Captain Underpants slowly lifted his head in confusion.
Mommy,
he said weakly.
My train went swimming in the piano.
Meanwhile, over at Piqua International Airport, Carl, Trixie, and Frankenbooger had just finished eating the space shuttle and were now starting to munch on the control tower. The 3 globbery gluttons grew bigger and bigger with every enormous bite.
Come on, Captain Underpants!
Cried George.
You gotta save those people!
But I forgot how to fly,
Captain Underpants said sheepishly.
You didn't forget,
laughed Melvin Sneedly, who was now floating above their heads.
You just lost your superpowers, but don't worry. They've been safely transferred to my body. Now I'm the world's greatest superhero.
Melvin!
Cried George.
Those Robo-Boogers came back to Earth! They're attacking people to the airport! You've gotta help those people!
I'm not doing a thing until you guys change that comic book.
Melvin said.
And you better make me look cool this time.
But there's no time! Cried Harold. Those people need your help now!
Well, you better start drawing then, art boy,
said Melvin. Chapter 19.
Never underestimate the power of underwear.
George and Harold begged Melvin to use his superpowers to save the day, but Melvin continued to refuse. Finally, Captain Underpants stepped in.
You may have taken away my superpowers,
the waistband warrior said,
but I still have the power of underwear on my side, and nobody could take that away from me.
Captain Underpants turned and ran toward the airport.
Melvin!
Cried George frantically.
If you don't do something, those boogers are gonna kill Mr. Krupp!
That's not my fault,
said Melvin.
You're the ones who wrote that stupid comic book about me. Now change it, or else.
George and Harold looked at each other. Their choice was simple. Either fight with Captain Underpants and probably die, or give in to the dark side and live. The 2 boys turned and ran to the airport. Chapter 20. Booger Brunch. George and Harold quickly caught up with Captain Underpants. Soon they were all at the airport witnessing the carnage of the ridiculous Robo-Boogers. Captain Underpants shouted a triumphant
tra-la-la
from below. Suddenly, the 3 ridiculous Robo-Boogers turned towards the familiar-sounding voice. Quickly, their laser-guided eyes zoomed in on 3 of our heroes who had made their lives so miserable back in Chapter 1. Immediately, the Robo-Boogers leaped at George, Harold, and Captain Underpants, and the chase was on. Again. Chapter 21. Cornered. The Robo-Boogers continued chasing George, Harold, and Captain Underpants until at last the 3 frightened friends were cornered at a local shopping center. In a desperate attempt to save themselves, the 3 brave heroes began taking items from outside sales bins and throwing them at the snarling beasts. George grabbed a pair of low-fat tennis shoes and tossed them at Trixie. Trixie gobbled them up. Harold found a delicious tube in a wild cherry-flavored hemorrhoid ornament and flinged it at Frankenbooger. Frankenbooger swallowed it whole. Captain Underpants picked up a generically modified organic orange-flavored orange and chuckled it at Carl. Carl chewed it up with a smug grin. Suddenly, Carl's laser eyes grew immensely large. The haughty smile on his face turned to a panicked gasp as the wet, gushy snot that covered his body began to dry up and crumble. Huge, crispy booglets shot out his smuggling robotic endoskeleton like green popcorn. What's going on? Cried Harold.
It's the oranges.
Cried George.
It's gotta be the vitamin C in these oranges. It's combating the cold and flu that caused those boogers to turn evil.
Carl thrashed around brutally as more and more of his disintegrating body cracked up and fell to the ground. Finally, the lights on his panic-stricken laser eyes slowly went out. He stumbled over and crashed horribly into the parking lot. Carl was dead. Chapter 22. Vitamins, see ya later! George, Harold, and Captain Underpants quickly began chucking oranges at Trixie and Frankenbooger, but the two remaining Robo-Boogers had gotten wise to the power of vitamin C. They ducked, jumped, dodged, and darted, doing whatever they could to avoid being hit by the deadly oranges.
Hey, I've got an idea,
said Captain Underpants. He grabbed 2 crates of oranges and ran off, while George and Hal continued flinging food ferociously.
Where does he think he's going?
Said George. I don't know, said Harold, but his idea better work. We're running out of oranges! Soon George and Harold were down to their last 2 oranges. They threw them as hard as they could, but at last, the potent projectiles missed their terrifying targets. Trixie and Frankenbooger grabbed George and Harold and dangled them above their gigantic mouths.
Well,
said George.
it looks like this is the end.
Yeah, said Harold. It was nice knowing you, pal. Suddenly, the Robo-Boogers heard a familiar coming from somewhere over the next page. The repulsive Robo-Boogers dropped George and Harold and stomped over to page 130. There, they found Captain Underpants standing at the top of a large novelty toilet on the roof of John House of Toilets. He was shouting,
Tra-la-la,
and doing a very annoying dance which made the Robo-Boogers very, very angry. Chapter 23. The Underpants Dance. In
You've tried the twist, mastered the Macarena, and figured out the funky chicken. Now it's time to learn the most annoying dance ever, the Underpants Dance. It's sure to irritate parents, teachers, evil villains, and kids of all ages. Just follow the easy steps in this chapter and learn the Underpants Dance today.
Introducing
Through the magic of anyone can learn how to do it. First, make sure you run your underpants. Then, all the courses steps should be next 8 pages.
With a little bit of practice, you'll soon be the most irritating person you ever met. Good luck! Step 1. The Wedgie Wiggle. Step 2. The Toilet Top Tango. Step 3. The Waistband Watusi. Step 4. The Big Bug Boogie. Chapter 24. Squishies Part 2. Trixie and Frankenbooger had seen enough. They couldn't stand to watch Captain Underpants doing that stupid dance 1 second longer. So they pushed down the seats of the large novelty toilet to hoist themselves up on the roof. Unfortunately for Trixie and Frankenbooger, they had been so irritated by the Underpants dance that they haven't noticed the 2 crates of oranges placed carefully under the gigantic toilet seat. When they pressed down, the pressure of the toilet seat crushed the orange crates, spraying delicious vitamin orange juice all over their big, bad, boogery bodies. George, Harold, and Captain Underpants watched as their monstrous arch-enemies began decomposing before their very eyes. What's happening to them? Asked Harold.
I give him a squishy,
said Captain Underpants.
It's the way it's bad.
The Robo-Boogers jerked around wildly as the quickly drying snot crumbled off their smoking, robotic endoskeletons. Then, after a few minutes of spinning and screaming, they slowly tumbled to the ground in 2 metallic heaps. Trixie and Frankenbooger were dead. Chapter 25. Big Melvin. Soon, Ingrid and Ashley from Channel 4 Eyewitness News arrived at the scene. How did you manage to destroy the Robo-Boogers? She asked.
I'll answer that,
said Melvin Sneedly as he swooped in front of the cameras. He was wrapped in some old drapes that he tied around his neck at the last minute, and he looked quite silly.
I, Big Melvin, fought those monsters with my mighty superpowers.
Melvin fibbled.
Then I destroyed them with my super smart brain.
No, you ain't, said Harold.
You weren't even there,
said George.
Don't listen to those guys,
said Melvin.
I, Big Melvin, am the real hero here.
Melvin flew above the two defeated Robo-Boogers and used his new laser eye beams to burn the letters B and M in front of the dead creatures.
Just like Sorrow,
said Big Melvin.
I shall sign from my incidentals on all my heroic handiwork from now on. Whenever you see a big BM, you think of me.
That's funny,
said George.
Big BMs have always made me think of you.
Big Melvin flew over to Captain Underpants and grabbed him by the arm.
Now,
said Big Melvin,
the entire world shall bear witness to the human defeat of Captain Underpants.
Suddenly, George and Hal got an idea. They turned and ran back to the school while Big Melvin continued to threaten Captain Underpants.
I command you to bow down to me,
shouted Big Melvin.
Never,
said Captain Underpants.
You shall bow down to me.
Big Melvin yelled.
I shan't,
cried Captain Underpants.
Then,
said Big Melvin as he untied the drapes around his neck.
You will feel the power of my wrath.
Chapter 26. The Drapes, a Wrath. Big Melvin held his drapes tightly, then smacked Captain Underpants in the tushy with them.
I command you to deny underwear and accept the power of Big Melvin,
he shouted.
No way, Pedro,
cried Captain Underpants. Big Melvin smacked Captain Underpants again.
Bow down to me,
he commanded,
and I shall spare your life.
Go jump off a duck,
said Captain Underpants defiantly. Suddenly, George and Hal returned to the scene, out of breath and hiding something behind their backs.
Hey, Big Melvin!
shouted George, huffing and puffing.
What?
yelled Big Melvin. Harold pulled the Combinotron 2000 out from behind his back and aimed it at Melvin and Captain Underpants. You shouldn't leave your toys lying around the library, Bob, he said slightly. Melvin shrieked in horror as Harold pulled the trigger. Blast! A blinding flash of gray light shot out of the Combinotron 2000, surrounding Melvin and Captain Underpants and squishing them together. George had reset the controller to combine them both and transfer their superpowers back to Captain Underpants, then separate them. I sure hope this works, said Harold.
Me too,
said George. Chapter 27. To make a long story short, it did. Chapter 28. With big underwear comes big responsibility. Big Melvin fell to the ground with a thud. Immediately, Captain Underpants began floating in the air.
Hey!
cried the good captain.
I've got my superpowers back. I knew that underwear would never let me down.
George turned and zapped the Channel 4 Eyewitness News team with the Forgetjamacolor 2000. Flash! Suddenly, the Channel 4 Eyewitness News team, as well as everybody at home watching the story unfold on Channel 4 Eyewitness News, immediately forgot what had just happened. The horror was over. Everybody was back to normal, and everyone was happy. Well, everyone except Big Melvin, that is.
Wow!
Subbed Melvin.
I want my superpowers back!
Quit your running, Bob,
said George.
You've been a total jerk for the last 2 bucks. You should just be happy that they didn't get your comeuppance.
Chapter 29. Come up and see me sometime. Soon, a crowd gathered and began to recognize Melvin. Hey! shouted Miss Anthro. That's the little squirt who said he's going to find my Heidi! There he is! shouted a couple of angry little ladies. That's the little brat who left us up in a tree!
He made us lose the game!
cried the entire football team simultaneously.
Dudes!
yelled one of the skateboarders.
That's the little dude who duded our dude boards a few dudes ago. Laughed
Melvin nervously.
Maybe I'll just go home now.
Get him! shouted the old ladies. Screamed Melvin as he ran away, followed closely by a large group of very angry people. Chapter 30, Harold's Surprise. As Melvin and his angry mob ran off into the sunset, George and Harold had just one last thing to deal with. A quick squirt of water to Captain Underpants' face was all it took to bring back his crappy old self.
Well, that takes care of that,
said George, and the two boys walked back to their treehouse. As George climbed up the ladder to the treehouse, Harold became quite fidgety. Said Harold nervously. There's something I should probably tell you, George. But when George reached to the top of the ladder and looked inside the treehouse, no explanation was necessary.
Hey,
said George.
I thought you told me you took Crackers back to his home.
I did, said Harold. Back to his new home,
Harold,
said George sternly.
You can't keep a pet pterodactyl. You know how many crackers they need to eat every day? Could never afford it.
I know, said Harold sadly. But look how cute he is! And he's made friends with Sulu too! Can't we keep him for just one night?
Alright,
said George.
We're taking him back tomorrow.
Chapter 31, Tomorrow. The next day, George, Harold, and Sulu returned to school with Crackers stuck snugly into Harold's book bag. Together, the four friends sneaked back upstairs to the library where the purple potty stood before them in all its forbidden glory.
Come on,
said George.
Let's give this baby another spin.
I don't know, said Harold. Maybe we should give it a day to cool off.
Nah, I'm sure it could be used 2 days in a row,
said George.
What could possibly go wrong?
But didn't Melvin warn us not to use this machine 2 days in a row? Asked Harold.
Yeah,
said George.
back in chapter 12. Started with the first one and the first one and the second paragraph of page 77.
What exactly did he say? Asked Harold.
It's me,
said George.
I'm not very good at remembering details.
Well, I don't know about this, said Harold. What if our journey brings about the end of the world as we all know it?
That's ridiculous,
said George.
It all sounds like a setup with a sequel to a really great children's book.
The four friends stepped inside the purple potty and closed the door behind them. George set the control to return them to the Cretaceous period of the Mesozoic era, and then pulled the chain. Suddenly, an orange light began flashing wildly. Hey, I don't remember seeing an orange light before, said Harold. Then, the purple body began to shake and rock violently.
I don't remember this thing shaking and rocking either,
said George. Something is wrong, cried Harold. Something is terribly wrong! Suddenly, the entire room lit up with an explosive burst of lightning, and the purple body began to disappear into a whirlwind of electric air. The only thing that could be heard above the chaotic clatter was the sound of two terrified voices screaming into the unknown abyss.
Oh no!
Screamed one of the voices. Here we go again! Screamed the other.
1, 2, 3, 4, 007. All the good guys go to heaven. 5, 6, 7, 8. Hey, hey. All the rest can go away. So little
Tra-la-la.